I'm Dr. Chris Bergwald.
I'm Father Scott Trainer.
And welcome to the series of videos that we're doing on Pat Lencioni's book, The Advantage for Pastorate Leadership Teams. So we're talking about the 4 different kinds of meetings. We covered the daily stand-up or daily check-in. The second one is probably the bread and butter meeting, Father. I think the weekly tactical meeting. And I think this is a really important meeting, not just in Pat's world or his method, but just in general, because this is the kind of meeting that most organizations, most parishes, most pastorates are used to having. Every week or two, we just get the staff together and we meet and we talk about the things that we're doing. But the way that Pat proposes doing this regular tactical level meeting, I think is so important to making meetings fun, but more importantly, fruitful and effective.
Yeah, so let's just go through. So this is like a once a week meeting with the team. It might last an hour up to 2 hours, definitely not more than 2 hours. We schedule ours for 2 hours. We started off with an hour. That seemed a little cramped sometimes, so we do it in 2 hours. Some people do 45 minutes, some people do an hour and a half. It just sort of depends on how much you got going on and the size of your team and things like that. But the goal of the weekly tactical meeting is to look at is first of all to review our commitments from the previous week, right? So as we've had clarity about who's going to do what by when, the first thing we do after we pray is we check in on the commitments from last week and we get updates about the work that people have been doing for the last 7 days. Okay, so going through the commitments, where are they at? Are they accomplished by the time they were going to be accomplished? Or if something gets stuck, what do you need to help it get unstuck? That kind of thing. So it's a review of our commitments. Then we look, the goal for the next part of the meeting is to say, hey, in the next 7 days, what are our priorities? We're having a conversation about what are our priorities as a team, and then who's going to do what by when. Drive that clarity. And in that time of the tactical meeting, we want to have whatever conversations need to be had, whatever information needs to be gathered to come to a decision to set those priorities and clarify those commitments. That's the idea of the weekly tactical meeting. One of the features about these weekly tactical meetings is we don't write up an agenda ahead of time. Chris, why not?
I was going to ask you that question.
I can answer it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so why not? So, normally when you have a staff meeting, someone's in charge of, like, everyone submits their things they want to talk about this week at the staff meeting, and someone then has to set an agenda. Setting an agenda is a really powerful, it's an exercise of power. And what I mean is, someone has to decide what the priorities are of what we're going to talk about. And, like, the most important thing is at the top, because, and what happens in a lot of meetings that have set agendas, like we're going to talk about these 7 things, is numbers 6 and 7. Oftentimes we run out of time and we never quite got to them. And then whoever that was important to from their silo, they're like, oh, that's my thing. Well, can we talk about my thing? Is like put out, and then the politics come in and the hurt feelings and the drama and unhealthy things ensue. Okay, so what Pat proposes for the weekly tactical meeting is a way of proceeding where after we review our commitments, then we are right in the middle of the meeting setting the agenda.
A real-time agenda.
A real-time agenda right in the middle of the meeting. And the way we do that is we talk about reds and yellows. So reds are from any person in the team, from any aspect of our work together as a team. It doesn't just have to be the thing that's my set of job responsibilities. So if I'm like the finance guy, it's not just like I can only contribute reds that deal with finances. No, it's hats off. We're a leadership team. So of all the things that are going on in the organization, a red I'm raising and I want to add to the agenda, the live real-time agenda, something that we need to talk about or come to a decision of or get information about in order to move ahead with our work for the next week. Okay? And that's a red. A yellow is something like, well, I can get through this week without it, but I see something coming up in 3 weeks or next month or something. It would be good to talk about if we have time.
So I think the important thing there is the time frame. So this is in the next week, because we're going to be again next week. The yellows are important because I think one thing, Father, that people like, Okay, but if I'm only, what about the things that are
Yeah.
important that are coming down the road? That's where the yellows come in.
That's right.
It's not that you're ignoring the medium or longer term things, but you're focusing on what do I need in order to get something done. And this is where, again, you've already established what your thematic goal is, what the defining objectives are. You've come up with your standard operating objectives. So you're probably you're reviewing what Pat calls the scorecard, where you have a written document
Yeah.
that names all of those things. So part of the prep for the meet, so there is prep so there's a real-time agenda. That doesn't mean I just get to saunter in and show up.
With no forethought.
Exactly, with no forethought. I need to be thinking about, all right, when I review the work that we're doing as a team, the things that are my responsibility, but also others' responsibilities, you said, these are the things that I'm identifying in advance as reds and yellows.
Right. So when we come to our agenda making, we start with the thematic goal, what's most important now, and its defining objectives. Are there any reds for those?
Yep.
And then we go into the standard operating objectives. We didn't really talk about these much
Nope.
in the previous video, but
Yep.
the standard operating objective, like in a parish life, would be like, just sort of areas of life, like religious ed or youth ministry or finances or facilities or whatever.
Yep.
So it's a good conversation in the team of, naming what those boxes are. But this is sort of just the day-to-day work of the organization that's always going on, but it's not a specific project or initiative that
Yep.
we are focused on.
Yep.
And you can have reds from both the defining objectives as part of the thematic goal, what's most important right now, or from those standing operating objectives. Like, if, the snowplow guy quit or isn't in the snowplow business, we got to hire someone because it's October and snow's coming. That's a red, right? But it's out of my standard operating kind of facilities
Right.
thing, right? But when that comes up, that's going to be a really important thing
Right.
to bring up. So that real time agenda formation is so freeing. It requires this commitment that everyone's giving forethought. They're looking through our defining objectives, thematic goal, and our standing operating objectives, and really saying, kind of racking their brain, is there something as a team we need to be talking about for this coming week? It's a real co-responsibility thing. It really helps our work be shared work, but that people have to come to the weekly tactical meeting having given that thought. And then when the agenda formation comes, basically you make a big list, and then the leader of the meeting just kind of picks what we're going to do. And people worry if you do that, you're not going to get to everything. Chris, in 3.5, 4 years of doing this, have we ever not gotten to all our reds?
Never, not all the reds.
Never, not all the reds.
We've always gotten to all of our reds.
And usually most all of the yellows.
Yes.
Sometimes not
Yes.
all the yellows.
Yes.
But all the reds always get addressed. And it has plenty of time. Why does that happen? That's really important. Sometimes there's a red, I want to give an example. Let's think of an example.
What we're going to do for Lumen Christi training for the summer missionaries, how we want to set up the training for them this year before they go off into the parishes.
Okay, so that's raised as a red, it's coming up, we have to have a plan, it's not been done yet. So we start talking about that. And in the weekly tactical, one of the keys of the weekly tactical is that if I'm talking about any of the agenda items, any single red on the agenda item, if that conversation starts going more than 10 minutes, sometimes we kind of get into a thing and we thought, this is just a simple conversation, we just need to decide a thing. But then, people have different ideas, good ideological conflicts happening, and it kind of opens up and they're like, ooh, this is a lot more involved than we thought, okay? Once we kind of hit that, 7 or 10 minute mark, what we're going to say is we realize we're not going to be able to come to the decision here. The action for now is to set another meeting called an ad hoc meeting. It's the third type of these 4 types of meetings, an ad hoc meeting just to talk about this one thing, okay? And we're going to talk about ad hocs in the next video, but the reason the tactical, we always get to the reds is if a thing kind of blows up and in a standard agenda would just have taken up the whole time and all the other agenda items never would have gotten touched on. If that conversation is getting big or involved, we just recognize that and we say, okay, well, what action can we take now? We need to set a time to have this more in-depth and lengthier conversation just about this thing. That's an ad hoc meeting. And that's our action for now. And then we're going to move on to the next agenda item.
Right. So we're going through. So again, to sort of recap where we're at so far, you start off by reviewing the previous tacticals commitments. Last week, who was going to do what by when, and where are we at with that? And then there's we use the term the lightning round is where you go around. No. These are my 3 priorities for the upcoming week. And then you get into the reds and yellows, the agenda formation. This is what I see as so you go around, collect the reds and the yellows. We should say, by the way, Father, it's common that the leader of the organization, so for D&E, you, it's common that the leader will lead these meetings, but it's actually not necessary.
That's right.
In some environments, it's actually somebody else in the team who's most effective at running the meetings that way.
And it is also good, whoever's running those meetings, so asking, okay, what are your reds? Go around the table, write them all down, and then kind of like picking which one are we going to talk about first, and kind of monitoring that we don't one agenda item doesn't suck up the whole time we have for the meeting. There's that person who's kind of marshaling the meeting, I guess. It's good to have someone else who's like taking notes.
Right.
So when we make decisions, we come to commitments, those should be written down so we can be reviewed next week, right? And always driving for that clarity of who's going to do what by when. At the end of the weekly tactical, the kind of closing part of it before you finish with a prayer is reviewing our commitments. So we're going around to reinforce clarity. Hey, these are the commitments. Everyone clear about this?
Right.
And sometimes, people space out during meetings and they're like, oh wait, what was that about again? What do you need me to do by next week?
Right.
Okay. And so we really very intentionally at the end of the meeting review our commitments like that. One of the things that is sort of a health check for the weekly tactical is if you at the end of the meeting don't have a bunch of actual commitments, the meeting has not achieved its purpose, okay? You've just ended up kind of talking about things without driving to clear commitments.
Yep.
And that would be a sign that your meeting is kind of going off the rails.
Right. So as you're going through, you're making these commitments as you're discussing things. So you have the reds and the yellows, and then you start off, all right, red number 1, and you talk through the thing. At the end of that, you've come to maybe a decision. Yeah. So just a very like a practical decision. Right. The way that we're going to let Father Scott know what our time off requests, when and how I'm going to let Father know. Father, can I get this day off or whatever? Okay, this is how we're going to do that as a team. So a decision or an action. Chris is going to record the next video of Scholarship, Mission, and Discipleship in the next week. That's an action that's being defined. Who's going to do what by when? It's kind of different than a decision that way. But then communication. Father Scott is going to talk to Twyla about this new role that we want to explore having on the team, whatever it is. So clarity about who's going to do what by when.
You missed one. Okay. So for each agenda item, think about this, all right? So for each agenda item, each red, right? The outcome of that agenda point is either a commitment, right? Who's going to do what by when, a clear commitment, or a decision that was made that we just have to be able to refer back to later because we had to make a decision and that's going to be kind of a thing that we need to refer back to in the first. Or, this needs more conversation. Yes. That's an ad hoc meeting. Or, who else needs to be told what about this thing and who's going to do that and why that cascading communication thing. So for each agenda point, there should be either one or more of those 4 categories decided at the agenda point. And again, if you get to the end of your tactical meeting, we have like nothing in that chart of decisions, commitments, ad hocs, or cascading communication. We're not having a tactical meeting.
Yep. I think that covers it, Father.
Perfect.
Great, thanks.